good example of when decentralization of these networks actually matters is a couple of years ago when the Samurai wallet developers were taken down. It had a chilling effect on the industry. You really couldn't stop Bisq any more than you could stop Bitcoin, because every person that's running the Bisq software is a node in the network. Welcome to the Sovereign Computing Show, presented by ATL BitLab. I'm Jordan Bravo, and this is a podcast where we teach you how to take back control of your devices. Sovereign computing means you own your technology, not the other way around.
This episode is sponsored by ATL BitLab. ATL BitLab is Atlanta's Freedom Tech hackerspace. We have co-working desks, conference rooms, event space, maker tools, and tons of coffee. There is a very active community here in the lab. Every Wednesday night is Bitcoin night here in Atlanta. We also have meetups for cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, decentralized identity, product design, and more. We offer day passes and nomad passes for people who need to use the lab only occasionally, as well as memberships for people who plan to use the lab more regularly, such as myself. One of the best things about having a BitLab membership isn't the amenities, it's the people. Surrounding yourself with a community helps you learn faster and helps you build better. Your creativity becomes amplified when you work in this space. That's what I think, at least. If you're interested in becoming a member or supporting the space, please visit us at atlbitlab.com. That's atlbitlab.com. All right, on to our show.
Welcome to the Sovereign Computing Show. I'm Jordan Bravo, and I'm here today with Stephen DeLorme.
What's up?
We want to remind you that you can boost into the show by looking up the ATL BitLab podcast on Fountain FM. And if you go to fountain.fm, that's the site that you can use it in the browser. You can also download it on iOS and Android. And we are going to get you other ways to contact the show in the future. We are working on an email address for the show that you can email into, and we're also working on a matrix room. So if you do not like using Fountain, or for whatever reason you just want to message us, you can do that in the future. Coming soon. TM. Today, before we get into our main topic, we're going to talk about a few corrections from previous shows, or just errata in general that occurs when things change, as they often do in software. We had talked about on a previous show in-person payments and how the limited options that we had were basically limited to cash, because if you're in person, you typically have to use your real debit or credit card. In contrast to when you're paying online, you can use something like a virtual card. We talked about privacy.com in a previous episode. If you want more information about that, go check out that episode. But again, there were no ways of paying in person that you could obfuscate your identity with, unless it was cash or Bitcoin, of course. However, in the time since, I've done a little bit of research and investigation, and I actually found that when you go to BitRefill, which we talked about for buying gift cards, you can indeed buy virtual Visa gift cards, but you can also have them shipped to you as a physical card. And so I am in the process of trying this out. The card has been shipped to a location that is not my home address, using a name that is not my real name. And when it arrives, hopefully within a week, by next episode, you might hear me have either success or failure. I'm going to take my card that doesn't have my actual name on it. I'm going to go to a coffee shop or something like that, and I'm going to try paying with my physical card that has a random name on it that was shipped to me to a random to a address that I have that is not my home address. So in other words, I paid for it using Bitcoin on BitRefill. I have it shipped to a private address that I can pick up from, and then using not my real name. And 99% of merchants do not check your ID. You know, if you're at the store, when was the last time you were ID'd to match your card? Not for something like buying alcohol, but just simply to match your face to your credit or debit card, right? It almost never happens. So I think this is going to be successful. and I will report back here with my findings.
Pretty cool. I didn't know they had that as an option.
I didn't either, so we'll see how it works.
Yeah.
The next bit of errata that we want to update you all on is eSIMs. Again, in a previous episode, we had talked about getting eSIM data privately from providers such as Mint Mobile, Silent Link, and at the time, we noticed live on the show that Stephen, can you go back to Bitrefill?
Yeah.
We noticed that Bitrefill is actually offering eSIMs. And so I wanted to try it out, and I did. And so here are my results. Now, whenever you're using a SIM to test bandwidth, it's going to be dependent on how close you are to the nearest tower and whether or not that tower is actually the primary infrastructure of your provider. So for example, if I'm on T-Mobile, right, and I'm near an AT&T tower, I'm not going to have as strong a signal because my bandwidth might be constrained. But in any case, for the variables that I could control for, which were just staying in the same location, I tried out 3 different eSIMs and did a speed test on it. So I did Silent Link, I did the Bitrefill eSIM that I got, and I did Mint Mobile. And my results were the Bitrefill was by far the slowest. It was 7 megabits per second. Then Silent Link was 40 megabits per second. And Mint Mobile was about 400 megabits per second.
Wow.
So you have almost factors of 10 there. I had been using Silent Link for the last several months, and it was usable but slow. The Bitrefill one was, in my opinion, unusable. I wouldn't use that unless I was absolutely desperate in the middle of nowhere and had no other option. Maybe you could use it for sending text-based messages, but for anything else, even web browsing, it was a struggle. For Silent Link, again, totally usable. I lived on it for the past 6 months, I would say. And it's very private and convenient to pay, but it wasn't fast enough that I wanted to continue using it. And so recently I went back to using Mint Mobile, but I have an update for using Mint Mobile and US Mobile. In our episode previously where we talked about decoupling your phone number from your data mobile provider, 2 of the recommendations I made were using Mint Mobile or US Mobile and paying for it anonymously by using a virtual or a Visa gift card that you could buy on Bitrefill with Bitcoin. So since I last tried it, it no longer works. I tried it again just a few days ago, and neither Mint Mobile nor US Mobile would accept my Visa gift cards that I bought on Bitrefill, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that takes away a large or a really good method of getting premium cellular data in a completely private way. Did you have any comment on that, Stephen?
Nope, just that it's a bummer.
Yeah, it sucks. However, I did find an alternative that is not perfect, but still pretty good. And what I found is that Best Buy sells Mint Mobile data, and Best Buys are great because they are everywhere. It's a national chain, so if you're in the US, you're almost always near a Best Buy, maybe probably you're going to be within driving distance of a Best Buy. Most people are. And so what I did was I went to Best Buy and I just bought a chunk of data. In this case, I did 3 months for cash, and I just paid it cash, and they give me this physical SIM or the eSIM, and you activate it with random names and stuff like that, and you're good to go. And so now I have fast 400 megabits per second cellular data, and it's completely private. And the thing that's a bit more of a pain in the butt about it is that you have to actually go in person to buy that. I don't know if I'll be able to renew it remotely. I'm going to give it a try, but I might have to go back and do it in person. However, now that I know that I really like Mint Mobile because it's private and has fast bandwidth, I'm going to, the next time I go and renew it, it'll be for a whole year. So if I do have to go in person, it's kind of a pain, but if I only have to do that once a year, I'm okay with it if I get great privacy. But I will report back on that and let you know how it goes.
And that wasn't just buying data, that was actually like registering for the eSIM you were able to do in person.
That's right.
Huh.
Now, as I talked about in the episode with decoupling your phone number, even though I get a phone number with that eSIM, I'm not actually using it.
Mhm.
I willfully forget it, and the numbers that I'm using are my VoIP numbers that I'm getting from, in my case, JMP. And that way, if I ever want to switch providers, like I just recently did when I was trying out BitRefill and Silent Link and Mint Mobile, my phone number is not tied to those, so I can just swap in and out at will, and my number is completely separate, and I can keep my number and do whatever I want with my phone number.
Very cool.
All right. The next bit of errata that we want to get into is in our episode about private web browsers, we had mentioned Firefox as being a great option. Well, we have a news article that this just came out in the past week or so, and this is Mozilla rewrites Firefox's terms of use after user backlash. So actually, Stephen, this might be the like reaction to the original one that we want to talk about.
Yeah.
You see the first after fielding user backlash. So maybe that's what we want to dig into.
So a response to backlash of a term saying it's not using people's data for AI.
So for those of you who didn't hear about this, the open source community typically follows what organizations like Mozilla do pretty closely. And so Mozilla released new terms of service for Firefox. And a lot of people were suspicious of it because the wording sort of sounded like they were suddenly making a legal claim to users' data that they previously weren't. And so Mozilla, it seems, is trying to play the public relations game now, and they're trying to maybe walk back their policy a little bit or justify it maybe. But the gist of it was this quote right here I'm going to read. It says, "When you upload or input information through Firefox, you hereby grant us a non-exclusive, royalty-free, worldwide license to use that information." And so that, I think, was the problem that people were pointing out. It's a lot of people are suspicious that this is paving the way for some new AI play by Mozilla or some kind of data collection play. And as we talked about in the episode on browsers, Mozilla's and therefore Firefox's primary source of revenue is getting paid by Google to include the Google search engine as default. And so Mozilla has long had the past several years have been that have shown them trying all kinds of different money making strategies, and nothing has really panned out. They tried things like Mozilla VPN and the Pocket service, which was where it was built into Firefox, where you could log in and have your website synced and the whole Firefox sync account thing, and they had a premium service for that. But all of these various product ideas that Mozilla has tried over the past few years have all flopped and been complete business failures. And so it's been interesting to watch them try to find other ways of generating money, which is admirable on their part, because if they don't want to be completely beholden to Google for all of their revenue, you would think would be a good thing. The problem is if they start doing something similar to Google in terms of privacy invasions, whether that's data collection or advertising, it makes people want to turn away from them.
Yeah, it's hard to know what to make of this. I think, I don't know, I feel like I see this language all over the place. And, on the one hand, it could just be like some kind of because it says to use that information to help you navigate experience and interact with online content. So at least if we interpret this very strictly, it doesn't say we can use this to sell it to advertisers. It just says we can use it as long as we're, helping you navigate experience and interact with online content. I'm not sure how legally broad that is. And, you know, also another thing too is that it looks like we have the CEO of Brave trying to capitalize on this to drum up controversy and all that kind of stuff, which makes good sense from a business perspective, right? So it's alarming, but it could also be nothing. I'm not sure.
Right. This could be a complete nothing burger, and we'll keep watching it and report back if there's any major updates. I personally am going to keep using Firefox, but if anybody else out there is interested, there are some popular forks of Firefox for people who either are distrustful of Mozilla or just want something that's even more privacy focused. And we'll name those out real quick. There's going to be WaterFox is the first one. They have in their tagline, "Get privacy out of the box with WaterFox." And so all of these are going to be very similar to Firefox. They're just going to have maybe out of the box some more private options. It's probably nothing you couldn't do on your own with Firefox, going into the settings and manually tweaking things. But at least with these privacy focused forks, you're getting that out of the box, as well as if Mozilla were to do anything shady with Firefox, like start collecting data, you can probably bet that these forks are not going to pick up that part of it as well. So WaterFox is going to be one. The next one is LibreWolf. Again, their tagline, they mentioned that they're focused on privacy, security, and freedom. And then the last one is called Pale Moon, one word, or maybe two words. And they are also based on Firefox, and they're focused on efficiency, and customization. So they don't explicitly talk about privacy, but if they're basically Firefox without any new shady changes, then you can sort of glean that it's also a private browser. Have you ever used any of these, Stephen?
I have not, but just eyeing the websites of these things, Pale Moon looks like it was put together by like hardcore open source Linux users, and has been I don't know. That's the vibe I get from that one. And then like the LibreWolf and like the WaterFox both have like incredibly simple and appealing looking marketing websites, especially the WaterFox one.
I think Pale Moon was forked off of Firefox many years ago, before Firefox underwent kind of a major version upgrade. And so they still have that old school look to them.
Yeah. But no, I haven't tried any of these.
There's one more special mention browser that I have not tried, but I've heard people talking about it, and that's Florp. FLOORP.
LORP.
Yeah, so it looks like the domain is florp.app, and it's another Firefox fork. And I'm not really sure what's so good about it. It also mentions privacy, and I've heard a lot of people talking about it. But if you're adventurous and you want to try out Florp, give it a shot.
Sweet.
All right. Anything else you want to comment on the Firefox or browser topic?
I think I'm good.
All right. Today's main topic we're going to talk about is we're going to do a deep dive into how to acquire non-KYC Bitcoin. That's non-know your customer Bitcoin. And for those of you who listened to our episode on private payments, we teased that we are going to talk more about how to acquire non-KYC Bitcoin. We talked about how when you buy Bitcoin from a place where you have to KYC yourself, where the company has to follow know your customer regulations, they have to put you through a series of steps where you're supplying identifying information. And that's going to be things like your real name and address, your government ID, phone number, and bank account in this case, because you have to connect some kind of payment system for buying Bitcoin. And so when you use something like Coinbase or even a Bitcoin focused app like Strike, for example, there's no way around it. They will not let you use their service unless you are providing your personal information. And when you buy Bitcoin in that manner, you are creating a record in a database that they have to keep for regulatory reasons that shows an exact time, date, timestamp, basically your name, your information, and information about that Bitcoin that you bought, the amount and the UTXO. So if it's on chain, there's a permanent record of that on the Bitcoin blockchain. And if somebody has that private data, even though a company's database is not public, it's possible that it could get leaked or just searched via a warrant by government agencies. And that's going to be permanently tied to your UTXO, your Bitcoin on the Bitcoin blockchain. Before we go further, I just had a thought. Maybe, Stephen, you would be able to answer this. But when you buy from a Lightning-enabled provider, let's say you're buying from Strike, and then you're sending it out via Lightning, since there's no on-chain transaction there's no UTXO to tie to your name. Do you know how they would possibly do a compliance-based tracking of that Bitcoin that you're sending out via Lightning?
What do you mean by compliance-based tracking? Like checking, like, do you mean checking, like, are you allowed to send to this address or invoice or whatever? Or
Yeah. So, I mean, I know from where I work, where we sell Bitcoin, we have to, when a customer buys Bitcoin, they are going to send it out to an address. And before they do that, send that on-chain address or send it to that on-chain address, we have to scan that address and compare it against a OFAC compliance list. And if it's banned, then we are not allowed to send it out to that address.
sure.
So I'm just thinking, when it's Lightning, you don't have the exact same mechanism there.
Yeah, exactly. And there are some services that like offer compliance checking and similar sorts of things for Lightning payments. But it's definitely more difficult. I think the like one obvious way to do it is just with like a Lightning node ID. So basically what I mean by that is like the pub key of the node and either the IP address or the Tor address of that node. You could certainly just take a Lightning node and say, you know, okay, this is on the this is on the sanctions list now or whatever. This is a bad guy. But you know, again, it might be that's not a perfect metric. Well, the on-chain one isn't perfect either, but you know, it's still not a perfect metric because, you know, somebody could just, you know, a bad guy could just make another Lightning node or whatever. You could also have a Lightning node that, you know, maybe it's not the final recipient of the payment. It might just be like, you know, providing a route hint to where the actual payment is going and all that. So it's certainly not perfect, but it would probably be done through pub key and IP address.
Okay. Well, that's actually good news, because that right there tells you that even if you're buying KYC Bitcoin, if you're receiving it over Lightning, that's already a privacy benefit right there. It's not perfect, but it's certainly better than on-chain, I would say.
Yeah, definitely.
Let me take a pause on the topic for a second and talk about why we might actually want non-KYC Bitcoin. So what's the problem with just buying Bitcoin via the typical KYC fashion, where I'm buying it from Coinbase or Swan or something and then sending it out to my Bitcoin wallet. Do you want to dive into that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that would just be the whole idea. We kind of touched on this a little bit in the private payments episode, but it's just that it's all observable on chain, right? So uh, once you've identified, like, I'm looking for anyone just listening, I'm looking at mempool.space, and I'm just looking at Bitcoin addresses here in the ledger. I don't really know who that address belongs to, but if I were to figure out their name, then I know this address belongs to Jordan, let's say, and then I can follow this around if I knew it was his, and I could not only figure out, like, trace back, like, where it came from, like which address it came from, but I could also see, like, where it gets sent to in the future, right? I could I could see, I could just follow this over the course of time. So it's a different it's a different kind of privacy question, I think. A lot of times when privacy, like privacy with Bitcoin payments, I think, and all of that is a little bit different than privacy in other areas. A lot of times, when you say stuff like you're talking about a messaging app, let's say, people might say things like, "Okay, well, I don't have anything to hide, so I don't really care if Facebook reads my messages," or "I don't really have anything to hide, so I don't really care if the government is able to get in and read my messages." Well, I don't think that's a great, viewpoint to have. I would argue that even assuming you agree with that viewpoint, it's fundamentally different than when it comes to Bitcoin privacy, because Bitcoin privacy the question is more like, do you want the entire world to be able to observe your financial activity? And that's kind of the situation we're at with the Bitcoin blockchain, is that on chain you can pretty much see everything that happens, and if somebody links a bunch of addresses to you, it's not just a matter of whether you're comfortable with a single company knowing your balance or your employer knowing your balance, but do you want, like, your friends to know? Do you want everyone in your community to know your exact balance? Do you want, like, people, do you want your enemies to know? Like, how many people are you comfortable with actually knowing your Bitcoin balance and Bitcoin activity? So it's just kind of a fundamentally different question, I think.
Agreed. Great point there. So we understand why we would not want to buy KYC Bitcoin. Let's talk about where we can buy non-KYC Bitcoin. And the first place I'd like to talk about is HodlHodl. And I want to go over this one first because it's probably the easiest for people to get started, simply because they have a website that you don't need Tor for. You don't have to install anything. And so you could just pop open a web browser and get started right away. And this is a peer-to-peer buying and selling Bitcoin platform. Last I checked, they don't support Lightning, so it's all on-chain, which means you have your 10-minute or more wait time. But it's still a great method for non-KYC Bitcoin. It's pretty similar to like an eBay type flow. Once you've created an account and logged in, you're going to see sellers. Let's say you're looking to buy Bitcoin. You're going to see a list of sellers, and they're going to have ratings next to them. And much in the same way as on eBay, you're going to use your judgment to say, this particular seller has a 99% positive feedback rating with 10,000 trades or something like that. And so you'd say, okay, they're obviously very popular and they're highly rated, so I'm going to choose them. And then what they do, HodlHodl acts as a escrow service and using a multi-sig. So the seller sends the Bitcoin to this multi-sig escrow address, and then you send a payment to the seller. That's going to be something like using Cash App, or you could pay them with Strike. You could also use something like Zelle, but I would recommend against Zelle because you have to use your real name and it's attached to your bank account. So the seller will see your real name. There's no way to obfuscate that. versus things like Cash App and Strike. You can just put some random username and that's all they'll see. So you send it to them, you hit I've confirmed that I've sent. Once they've received it, they hit release, and then HodlHodl releases the Bitcoin to whatever wallet you've entered. If there is a dispute, of course, HodlHodl will deal with it. They'll arbitrate. I've used this quite a bit and never had it go to dispute, which is either really fortunate or a good sign that it's rare. Yeah, I don't think there's any more to say about that. Can you see, Stephen, whether there's a way to pay out over Lightning?
Like to filter by
Yeah.
well, they do say, I mean, it does say in the offer details here, some
Oh,
people,
look at that.
yeah. So it may be that they support Lightning now.
I wonder if that's just a swap, like you can pay Lightning and get on chain or vice versa.
I think you might be right. Yeah, I think that might be what it is. Which at that point, I wonder why you wouldn't just, there's probably submarine swapping services like bolts.exchange that, like, on that note, I mean, it might be also just looking at very quickly, I think it's bolts.exchange, is that their address?
Yep.
And they
That's a
let you
good one.
swap between Bitcoin, Lightning, Liquid, and like Rootstock. So yeah, that works pretty good. So if you just need to swap between on-chain and Lightning, this would probably be a simpler service. I mean, their fee is pretty low. HodlHodl would probably work as well, but you might not get as consistent of a price as you would, because it's going
Right.
to depend on the seller and all that.
But if you want to go from fiat to Bitcoin, this is certainly a good option.
Have you ever had on any issues using these types of peer-to-peer marketplaces? So I had an issue on another peer-to-peer marketplace that I don't want to mention right now, but so I had an issue with like exchanging between currencies where it was like, okay, I wanted to buy, I don't know, it was like $100 worth of Bitcoin or something like that, which seems pretty straightforward. You know, I was, quoted a price very much like this in this column every year. But then and I think the method I chose was PayPal. So I was going to send a PayPal payment to get the Bitcoin. I was really just testing the service to see. And I ran into this like really interesting dispute where when I make the PayPal payment, it alerts me that the other person is going to receive it, and like I think it was British pounds. And so they receive the payment, and then they come back to me telling me, like, kind of debating with me in the chat that like, oh, I didn't get as many British pounds as I wanted. And I'm trying to be like, well, no, like I was quoted in dollars. If I was asked to pay you a certain number of pounds, I would have happily paid it. But the order that I agreed to on the website was denominated in dollars. I was asked to pay that many dollars. And yeah, and then the person like wanted to get into all this like annoying stuff with me, like wanted to be like, I want you to like, kill this order and start a new one. And I was like, this is really shady. And I ended up just they ended up just refunding the money to me over PayPal, and we ended up just canceling the peer-to-peer order because we just couldn't reach an agreement on it. But anyways, have you ever run into any negative situations or like disagreements over currency swaps or anything like that?
No, I've never run into that. That sounds like there was some kind of exchange, like foreign exchange fee being taken out without either of the users having any say in it.
I think so. Well, I think what it was is it was just slippage, right? It was just the exchange rate being slightly different. So by the time the
Mm.
I guess what was I? I guess I would be considered the buyer in that scenario. So by the time the seller got around to it and looked at it, it wasn't the amount of pounds they were expecting. But the thing about it is that, like, as the buyer, you don't really have an option. Like, you don't get to, if you're typing in, if on your screen it says $100 and you go to PayPal and type $100, you don't get to choose how many British pounds that comes out as on the other end, right? Versus like if somebody on PayPal were to say request 100 British pounds from me, then it would be then that would be the way to do it. Does that make sense? It would be like, so it's like if it's imperative that it comes out as a certain number of pounds on the other end, then the seller needs to be the one to like create that invoice. It's like the person who like initiates the transaction. That's where it chooses. That's where the exchange rate gets defined, I think.
I can't tell in this situation whether it was the responsibility of the seller or whether the platform is at fault for not making it clear that there's going to be a foreign exchange happen, in which case they should have laid out what the fees or the final price or the final amount would be.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the way I looked at it is the seller should have denominated it in pounds and not in dollars at that point. Like if they wanted a specific number of pounds, it should have been denominated in pounds. But yeah, anyways, I think that's looking at some of the edge cases and kind of annoyances that some of these peer-to-peer platforms can have. So it might be that, um, you just look out for that and like make sure that when you're using this stuff that the person is, actually expecting dollars, and that's what they want on the other end of that trade. I think if you're especially for like some of this stuff, I see some of these are like denominated in like Tether. And so if you're dealing with Tether, I don't really think you probably can't really go wrong with that. Um, and I think if you're using Cash App, you also probably can't go wrong with that, because I don't even think that's available. I'm not even sure it's available in Europe. I might be wrong on that. It's the tricky one is platforms like PayPal, which support a wide range of currencies. So just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, good to know. Okay, well, the next one we want to talk about, the next peer-to-peer non-KYC service or app to use is RoboSats. This happens to be my particular favorite. You do have to have a Tor-enabled browser. If you're using Brave, that would work. Also, the Tor browser. You can do this on mobile. And then in addition, Android has a native mobile app for RoboSats. I don't know if they're going to be able to come out with one on iOS anytime soon because of iOS's. There's a ongoing problem with mobile app devs where iOS is notorious for killing background processes. So if you have something that you need to be running in the background, it's not really possible to keep it going unless you do some kind of weird, janky tricks. So it sounds like right now there's no immediate plan for RoboSats to be an iOS native app. But if you are on Android, you could go ahead and take advantage of that. So RoboSats is another one of these peer-to-peer marketplaces. And when you create an account, it's actually an ephemeral account. They encourage you to spin up a new account every time you start RoboSats. And so it'll automatically generate an account for you. You can copy and paste a token string that will, if you ever need to come back and recover your account, sign in again, you can do that. Otherwise, it just will generate a new one for you. So that's one level of privacy right there. The other level of privacy you're getting that we just talked about is it's over Tor. There's no option to access it over ClearNet. So by using Tor, it is obviously a little bit slower because that's generally how Tor is, but it's also a lot more private. And the other thing about RoboSats that makes it one of the best is that it's decentralized. So it's going to be more resilient to being shut down in the future versus compared with if it were a single point of failure. They've recently, in the past couple years, taken the steps to have about 5 or 6 different, they call them coordinators. So it's actually running on several different servers around the world, geographically distributed. And if for those of you who are watching, you can see Steven's going through the onboarding flow here where it generates an identity and it gives you a name and a cool looking robot to go with it. And then when you get to this screen, you can click on offers or create. So if you want to just see the existing offers, go ahead and click on the offers. And this is where you'll see all the stuff that's for sale and people who are buying. So Stephen, if you scroll up a little bit, you'll be able to see the filters.
Yeah, let me hide the unsafe thing. Okay.
Yeah, so what I would do is, I want to buy, and then I'm going to select dollars. And in this case, this is how you're going to avoid one of those problems like you encountered, Stephen, where it's using the wrong currency. And then for method, the two I've had the most success with are Strike and Cash App. I like Strike. I've had a lot of sellers tell me that they like Strike the best because there's fewer fraud attempts on it. That could be by virtue of the fact that it's just has a smaller user base. Not as many people know about Strike compared with Cash App, so there's fewer scammers on it. But in any case, what I would do then is click on the premium column, sort it by how much they're charging over the typical market price. And then I would just typically I'm going to choose the cheapest one, which is at the top. And you can see right here that this seller accepts both Cash App and Strike. And there is one caveat with RoboSats. If you haven't used it before, you are going to need to already have some Bitcoin to be able to lock it up in a bond. And you could see where it says where it doesn't say the bond amount. Can you go back to offers?
Yeah.
See if you can find that same one. You might have to resort it.
I think it was this one right here. Cash App, Strike, 1.8% premium.
Maybe maximize this thing in the bottom left corner. There's a square box icon that will enlarge this whole window.
Hold on one second. I don't see that actually. You said in the lower left?
Yeah, but you see Smart Yaw 867, the last
Yeah. Oh,
line in the table.
Okay. I see. Bond. There you go.
Okay. So it says bond and then 2%. What that means is however much you're buying, if you're buying, let's say you're buying 100,000 sats, you're going to have to lock up 2% of that, and you get it back. That bond, both the seller and the buyer have to put in a bond, and that's just to prevent either party from abandoning the trade. So you will get that back as long as the trade goes through. And even if you both mutually cancel the trade, you'll get it back. The only time you wouldn't get the bond back is if you try to cheat and they arbitrate against you, or if you completely abandon the trade. So in the amount column, you could see how much they are willing to sell. So if you wanted to buy somewhere between $100 and $220 worth of Bitcoin, you would click that one. But let's say you wanted a lot more. Well, you'd need to drop down to that next seller because he's selling up to $4,000 worth of Bitcoin.
I see. What's the difference between the host and the... Whoops, I did not mean to back out there. Hold on, let me get back into there. Doing it live. What's the difference between the robot and the host?
Okay, so the robot is the seller or buyer. The host is one of the coordinating servers. So like I was saying, there's about 5 different coordinator servers. There's a way to bring them all up to, I believe, the Big Lake. That's the host, aka coordinating server. So it says, becoming a RoboSats. Ooh, that is in Portuguese. Becoming a RoboSats coordinator represents boosting intrinsic values of decentralization and economic freedom. RoboSats solves the problem of KYC and loss of privacy that that big exchanges are forced to comply with. I believe that decentralizing the Lightning nodes will enhance the robustness of the tool, allowing more users to join. I'm excited to be part of this new phase of growth. So that's the description from the RoboSats project about why they are decentralizing the coordinator server. So originally there was only one coordinator server that was run by the project creator, and now it's there's 5 or so of them, and they are not run by the project maintainer.
Interesting. Yeah, and each one
Or maybe one of them still is.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, pretty cool.
If you click on in the bottom right, there's a more tab.
Yeah.
I think that might show all the. There's somewhere that shows the list of different hosts, but it's not super important.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Oh,
here we go. Here's somewhere. It's under the settings.
there it is.
Yeah, the Big Lake, Temple of Sats, Bitcoin Veneto, and Over the Moon.
Yep. And so you can disable or enable them if you want to hide one or more.
Very cool.
Yeah, so I've had great success with this. I've been using RoboSats for a couple years now, and once you do it the first couple times and you figure out the flow, the first time it's new, so you're learning. You have to figure out the UI and how do I lock up Sats. But once you've got it down, it takes me maybe 5 minutes, and I've got non-KYC Bitcoin. So it's really fast. It's over Lightning. Everybody's very responsive, and you have escrow protection from getting scammed. So highly recommend it. And that's all I have to say about this one.
Cool. Where should we go next?
All right. The last non-KYC place to buy Bitcoin is going to be Bisq. That's BISQ. And Bisq is a little bit more involved simply for the fact that you can't use it in a browser. You have to actually download it to your desktop or laptop computer. They don't have a mobile option. But once you have it installed, if you go to bisq.network, they've got pretty good documentation. And once it's installed, it uses Tor under the hood. So you've got great privacy there. And similar to RoboSats, you're going to have to start out with an amount of Bitcoin because it's going to use that as a bond to prevent people from cheating or trying to scam each other. So again, if you need to get that first bit of Bitcoin, recommended ways to get it are HodlHodl, like we talked about earlier, or talking to somebody at a meetup, a local meetup, and getting some face-to-face Bitcoin. Or you could even buy some KYC Bitcoin just to use as your bond, and then keep that separate and start your non-KYC stack using one of these methods we're talking about today. So Bisq has been around a long time. They recently underwent a brand new major version, so that they have Bisq 2. Keep an eye out for Bisq 2 if you are trying this out, because that's the route that you want to go. They still have Bisq 1 running because it's the legacy network and they don't want to shut it off. But Bisq 2 was completely revamped and made to be a lot more user-friendly and easier to use in general.
But it's still like a separate piece of software that you download and run on your computer, right?
That's right. Oh, you know what? I take back what I just said.
Mm-hmm.
You no longer have to start out with an amount of Bitcoin to get started. They have something called Bisq Easy as part of Bisq 2.0. You see up at the top in the header, there's
I'm on
Bisq Easy.
I'm on there right now.
Okay, cool. Bisq Easy was launched in March 2024 as the first Bisq 2 trade protocol, designed especially for new and novice Bitcoin buyers to get their first Bitcoin in a safe, private, and self-custodial way. So that was one of the major complaints with Bisq was that for new users, it was hard because you have to start out with Bitcoin to use as a bond, kind of like a security deposit. And so with Bisq 2, they've now made it an option where you can buy from certain buyers without needing any kind of collateral.
That's cool.
So if any of you listening or watching have tried Bisq in the past and felt it a little too cumbersome, it's undergone a huge change. So maybe give it another shot and see if it's to your liking nowadays.
Do you know why it requires this like other application to run?
You mean Bisq 2 versus Bisq 1?
Well, they both require us to download like a piece of software that runs on the computer, right?
Right.
I guess I was just curious about like why that design decision. Why does it need like its own piece of software to run?
As opposed to running in a Tor browser, for example?
Yeah. I mean, just, we have these really complicated web applications. We got stuff like RoboSats where it's like all the order book stuff can kind of happen in the web browser there. Like what's fundamentally different about Bisq that makes it need its own compiled software binary that you have to run?
I don't have a perfect answer for you, but I do know that it was written in Java, and Bisq is a lot older than RoboSats, right? So
Yeah.
when Bisq first was created, I don't think we had the technology to create the same rich web applications that we do now. It wasn't possible to do the same kinds of things in the browser. So I think that drove the design decisions back then. And now I think the code base is so extensive that they don't want to do a complete rewrite from scratch. I think they're just building on what they already have. So it might be a technical limitation, but that's just a guess on my part.
Yeah, just curious. I know it is kind of like its own network protocol too, isn't it? Like, aren't there like the Bisq servers and all that? Don't they have like their own like little protocol language they speak to each other or something like that?
You could be right.
It's
Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I think that would be my only guess is why that might be the case. That it's kind of like running a Bitcoin node or a Lightning node. Like you need this piece of software that's like capable of speaking whatever protocol and like talking to other nodes on the network.
That makes sense.
But yeah, I don't know. It might be a fun UX thing at some point if somebody could make like a WASM client or like some kind of like WASM binary that could like run as part of like a web application that could still talk to Bisq, and it might make the like onboarding to Bisq a little easier. But I'm not sure. I'm just spitballing ideas right now.
That would be cool. I would say the major thing is whether or not Java can compile to WASM. And that's WebAssembly for those of you who don't know what we're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, yeah, easier said than done, right? Like if this community's, stuff is already built around Java and all that, that's a lot of code to write. It would have to be like a brand new client or something like that, probably.
A feature that I would like to see from Bisq, and I know that this has been requested a lot in their feature request forum, is the ability to have to decouple the sort of daemon that has to always be running from the GUI client, so that you could have the daemon running on your server, like let's say with your Bitcoin node, and then the GUI client that you can access via a browser. That way, because the way it currently is, at least the last time I used Bisq, one of the annoying parts of it is that Bisq has to be running in order for you to be able to transact or interact with the network. And so you have to leave your computer on. You can't let it go to sleep or it's going to cut off. And so if you had that ability to decouple the client and server, and you could put the server on your always on server, let's say where your Bitcoin node is running, then you could not worry about having to turn it off and on. It's just going to be always running in the background, and you can access it from your laptop, your mobile browser, whatever.
Yeah, that explains it right there. It has to always be running. That's probably why
Mhm.
it needs its own application. Like I haven't studied this protocol, at all, as evidenced by um, how many questions I have and how little I know about it. But it sounds like if they have something that like a daemon that needs to be running all the time, then that means that, like, I don't know, it sounds like it needs very, very frequent state updates from the other, like, let's call them Bisq nodes on the network. So yeah, that's
Oh,
probably
you're
what.
right. And the node, a Bisq node, is the right way to describe it because unlike RoboSats, for example, or HodlHodl, it's completely peer-to-peer. There is no centralized server. So Bisq might actually be the most resilient and decentralized of the services we're talking about. But the downside is that you do have to have these nodes that are always on in order to be part of the network. And so that's why it would be great if you could decouple the client from the server.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it would be kind of like on the Bitcoin side of things. We're really getting into the weeds here, and this is more philosophy than actionable sovereign computing advice, I think. But it's interesting for me. Like, on the Bitcoin side of things, it's like obviously running a Bitcoin node is the most sovereign way of doing it. But there's also these other options for different situations and people who need it, right? Like, you could use an Electrum server, so you could just get your Bitcoin block data from somebody else's node. You could also have multiple Electrum servers defined, like some Bitcoin software supports that, to where you can kind of request block data and transaction data from multiple different Electrum servers. So if you don't want to trust one of them, you can just sample from a couple different ones. And then there's also stuff like compact block filters and like neutrino and stuff like that allow you to kind of not run a full Bitcoin node, but just kind of selectively get block data, block filter data. Um, yeah, there's just a lot more options out there in terms of how we get Bitcoin block data. There's a lot more work that's been done on that. Um, uh, but it sounds like with Bisq, it's still kind of it's sounding like it has this still more like you need to run a full node approach. Like, it sounds kind of like it's where Bitcoin itself was, in the early days, where it's like, everyone using Bitcoin in 2010 was probably running a Bitcoin node, right? So it's like and so, like, similarly, like, today, anybody using Bisq is running a Bisq node, and there's not that, like, flexibility in terms of how you can interact with the protocol, I guess.
Right. And so you get decentralization with the trade off of a more difficult user experience.
Yep, that makes sense.
And for those who might think this all sounds very theoretical, a good example of when decentralization of these networks actually matters is a couple years ago when the Samurai wallet developers were taken down. It had a chilling effect on the industry. A lot of entities in the US that were Bitcoin related had to stop doing business in the US. And one of those entities was Agoradesk. And Agoradesk was a KYC free Bitcoin peer to peer exchange, similar to HodlHodl, but they were a great source and I had used them a lot in the past. But sadly, they had to shut down just because they were scared of the legal implications. And so the reason that they were vulnerable was that they were a single centralized server.
Mhm.
And so if the authorities came knocking, it would be trivial for them to shut them down. Whereas Bisq, I mean, this thing has been going on for a long, long time. I can't remember the exact year it started, but it's very resilient. The only way that you really couldn't stop Bisq any more than you could stop Bitcoin because every person that's running the Bisq software is a node in the network. And so in the same way that you would have to go out and shut down every single Bitcoin node in the world to stop Bitcoin, you would have to go out and shut down every single Bisq node in the world to stop people from trading on Bisq.
Hardcore.
Well, that's all we have for buying Bitcoin in a non KYC fashion. If there's anything you listening or watching would like to comment on regarding that topic, tell us. Boost in. Have you used non KYC Bitcoin exchanges before? Do you have any non KYC Bitcoin? Oh, One last thing I'd like to throw out there, a pitfall to avoid when you are buying non-KYC Bitcoin, it's important to keep track of the Bitcoin that you have that's non-KYC and the Bitcoin that you have that you bought from a KYC exchange. So make sure you keep those separate. If you mix them together, you've tainted your non-KYC Bitcoin, and now you've kind of lost that privacy. So anywhere that you send it, it's going to still have the same privacy downsides as the KYC Bitcoin. So I just wanted to put that out there in case anybody is new to this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
All right, so boost in, let us know what you think. Well, all right, everybody, thanks a lot for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Catch you later. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about anything that we discussed, you can look for links in the show notes. That should be in your podcast player, or you can go to atlbitlab.com/podcast. On a final note, if you found this information useful and you want to help support us, you can always send us a tip in Bitcoin. Your support really helps it so that we can keep bringing you content like this. All right, catch you later.